rather be listening today to your stories and learning from you. But I don't think that they'll let me do that at this point. I've got to say something. And when I asked, Lena asked me what the title should be for this workshop, I wasn't sure, and I was a little bit worried that I had anything that would be useful for your work and your ongoing organizing and your struggles. But I proposed, what is a story? Because it seems so obvious, and I think if I ask you today, do you know what a story is? Most of you will say yes. I think, do you know what a story is? Do we know? We do, right? Because we're surrounded by story from the time that we are born. You know, we're not only told stories before we can speak, but we read stories before we have words, with picture books. And some of those picture books we remember our whole lives. I'm not sure if that's true for everyone, but I know for a lot of people, the books we read as little children, we keep with us. And one that has stayed with me is called The Carrot Seed. If I had a PowerPoint, I would show you the cover in case you don't know the book. But it's a children's book about a little boy and who has a seed for a carrot, and he wants to plant that seed. Has anyone ever seen this book? Because it's a classic book. He wants to plant this seed, and his father, the father who has all the authority, tells him right away, there's no point in planting that seed, it's never going to grow. And his mother comes next and tells him there's no point in planting that seed, it's never going to grow. And then his brother says the same thing. But the little boy plants the seed and he starts to water it. And the whole book is basically a series of drawings of this little boy watering the ground and his family telling him he's wasting his time. It's never going to grow. And then, one morning, the earth starts to shake, and this carrot shoot comes up. And the final image, which I loved as a boy, is he pulls up the carrot and he has a wheelbarrow, because the carrot is bigger than he is. That's called the carrot seed. And I probably was told that story and read that story certainly before I went to school. So story is something that we are so familiar with. And yet, years later, when I decided that I wanted to become a storyteller, I realized I didn't really know what a story was. I had enrolled at graduate school at NYU to study filmmaking, and I spent 5 years there in the film program, and I made a number of films there. But when I was done, I realized that I had never really learned what a story is. And I want to give an example from the film that we watched with you, but from New York City. We watched An Act of Worship last night. We tried to watch it at the same time, so we would be in sync. And this was one of the many characters, whose name I don't remember, but a young woman who's getting married.
She's with us.
Oh, she's with us?
Yeah. Abir, are you here?
Okay.
I'll call her back on
Well, can I continue without her?
Please.
She wants to get married, and she's getting married, but her father is not there because he's been arrested and he's been deported. And the only contact she has with him is through a cell phone. And there are these great events, momentous events. A wedding. For the father, maybe one of the most important moments in his daughter's life as a father, to be at the wedding. a deportation, an enormous ceremony to get married. All of these things happen, but it's not a story. We're not told a story. What we are given are a series of events. And is that clear when I say it's not a story? That is, let me put it differently. A young woman wants to get married. Is that a story? Not yet. It's an event. It's a wish. She wants her father to be at the wedding, but the father has been deported. Is that a story? She reaches out to her father and talks to him on the phone. The father tries to get his papers. The papers are denied. There are lawyers and government officials and the husband-to-be and the entire extended... All of these big events in a person's life do not add up to a story because they're missing the magic ingredient. At least that's what I would like to try and share with you today, is how to take events which are known as plot. Is that familiar to you as a word, plot? There's a classic description of story by an English writer who says he wrote almost a century ago, he wrote, "The king died and then the queen died." Two enormous events. And he said, that is not a story. That is plot. But if we add two words to the end of that sentence, we can convert it from a story, from a plot to a story. And those two words work like this. The king died, and then the queen died of grief. Two events that have no meaning to us when they're just presented to us. The king died and the queen died. There's no meaning. But as soon as you add the words of grief, it connects them in a relationship that gives both of them meaning. And I've seen this in my own life many times when two people who have spent a lifetime together and one dies and very soon after the other dies. The connection between them is key to the definition of story. But we're surrounded with events. Are we? Can you hear me? I'm not even. I wasn't sure how to begin today because I wanted to make the point that we're all experts in story, but we're experts in listening to story, in reading stories, and in hearing stories, and in watching stories. But we're not experts in telling them or writing them, as hard as it is to admit. Because I had to admit it at the age of 32 after 5 years of graduate studies where I made films and I thought I understood what story was, and I had this epiphany, like an awakening, that I actually can't answer the question, what makes a story a story? And then I started teaching and I thought, maybe I can save other people the 5 years and the student debt and just give you, in a nutshell, what I think the key is. And that's what I'd like to do today. Before that, I want to say something about the responsibility of the storyteller, which is not something that is usually taught in a writing workshop or in a storytelling workshop. Are you familiar with the expression or the rhyme, "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me"? Is that something you've heard before? Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's simply not true, right? Words hurt. Words distort. Words erase. Words confuse. Words control. And pictures are the same. Being a filmmaker, in teaching film, I insist that the students I have do not pick up the camera until they're aware of how dangerous it is. The idea that the camera is a weapon that is extremely destructive, that the camera has destroyed more and caused greater problems for us today than it has offered solutions. It's a very, very dangerous machine. It's like we don't allow people to get in a car and drive until they've learned that they can run someone over. But cameras are ubiquitous, and we pick them up and we think that they can do no harm. But I have spent my adult life trying to recover from the harm that was done to me by film and by TV. Film and television told me what it meant to be a boy, and what it meant not to be a girl. Told me what it meant to be American. Told me what it meant to be quote-unquote white. Films and television told me who my friends were and who my enemies were, who I should be afraid of and who I should not be afraid of. And I have literally spent my life trying to recover from the damage that was done. We all know the cowboy and Indian movies, right? I mean, I didn't grow up in the US. At the age of 5, my family, I was born in Boston, but at the age of 5, my family moved to a place called Belgium, and I was put in a Belgian school, and all my classmates were Belgian, and they all spoke French and Flemish, and I had to learn French and Flemish, and by 10 years old, I thought I was a Belgian boy. I was convinced I was a Belgian boy, and I thought I was a happy little Belgian boy, but I wasn't a Belgian boy. And I was being shown on TV, even in Belgium, cowboy and Indian films. And this is a long digression to say, words do hurt, stories have the potential to be very damaging and destructive, as film is. And so the first thing I wanted to say in the workshop is that we are dealing with things that are really very, very powerful. And if the camera is a weapon that can destroy things, our job is to learn how to use it to destroy untruths, how to use it to destroy ignorance, and how to use it to show things as they really are, to try and recover things that have already been taken from us. And the same with story. Are we okay? I kind of wanted to be closer to everyone, but if I go any closer, I'll already be, it'll be like a concert where you're in the middle.
Maybe if there are empty seats, like,
but no one needs to move. I just
if they want to.
if they want to.
You can move your chairs up front.
So why do we need a workshop on storytelling? And how can it be practically useful in your own work? My thought for the time that we have was that I would spend the first part now sharing what I think the key elements to a story are, and then we would take a break and come back and do something that's a little bit more interactive. Does that sound okay? And you can vote with your feet if what you don't like, what you're hearing you don't like, you can leave, or you can just demand clarification. But I hope that that some of these ideas will make sense. So the starting point for me is that every story, and I'm going to be dogmatic, but I'm not a dogmatic person. I want to be dogmatic just to get your attention. When I say every story has to be about one person, about one living being. The kids here maybe have seen Disney films, and there's a film called Kung Fu Panda.
Yeah.
Has adults seen that film? You've seen? Okay, so it can be a living being. A story can be about, but can only be about one panda. A story cannot be about 100 pandas. Story has to be about, oh, please, yes.
Yeah.
No, you had a thought.
So, like, in, like, the end of Kung Fu Panda, like, this is, like, completely unrelated, but, like, in, like, one of the movies, it kind of zooms out on, like, pandas as a whole, so, like...
Okay, the message of the story can be about pandas as a whole, but we're going to come to that. That's what a theme is. You've actually, what is your name?
Hamza?
You've touched on the key problem, especially for those of us who are activists, is that we think we can make a story about a theme. We can't. We can talk about a theme, but it's not a story. And so it won't have the power of the stories that have shaped us. Here is the basic problem. We're experts in consuming stories, but we have not been given the tools to tell them. So, okay, let's say that we were building a house, and what we knew was that a house has a door and walls and windows and a roof and maybe, in this country, a garage, right? But if we haven't been told where they go, we can easily put the front door on the roof. We can construct a story which nobody can enter because they can't get through the front of your home. They can't get into the story because even though you have the elements, you don't have them in the right place. It's not a really good example, is it? But if I had a board, I would draw it and you'd get it. If the front door was on the roof, you couldn't get in. Telling a story that's really a theme or a message about all pandas will never work. You need to choose one panda. You know you want to talk about all pandas, or you know you want to talk about what it means to be a political prisoner in the US of A. You have to choose one character. That's my starting point. Every story has to be about a single living being. Second, and this is really, I mean, I'm kind of, am I talking loud?
No,
Because usually I don't have...
Everyone is transfixed by what you're saying.
I don't know, but if I'm too loud, would you just like... I'm actually upset that this was not taught to me a long time ago. If that's what I'm feeling, is that we know how important stories are. Even if we are suffering a personal crisis, sometimes our closest loved ones try and pull us back, and what they're doing is trying to remind us what our story is. Like, let's say you're despairing. You feel helpless, victimized, and then your partner or one of your close friends says, look what you're doing. You are going up against this entire system and you haven't been broken. And they're changing the lens of our own story, right? That's how important story is. Story is as important as water and food to us. And yet we are not taught how to tell them. Now, some people are natural storytellers, right? We all know those people. For example, I used to work in an office in Wall Street. When I was in film school, I had a job working in a Wall Street office in the graphics room. And, well, if you ever saw the TV series The Office, it's a little bit like that. Everyone gathers around the coffee machine. And there would be one person who could keep everyone transfixed. And what they're talking about is how the car didn't start, because of the cold weather. And then someone else is telling us that their son, has just had his heart broken, and nobody listens. They're like getting their coffee and walking off. Why is that? One person is a natural storyteller, but it's not something we all have. And yet, the tools are really straightforward. They're really simple. Number one, remember, you can only have one character, whose story it is. There can be many people in your story, but the story is about one person. The second thing is that person So there's not a lot to remember. You don't even have to take notes. One, you have one character. Two, that character needs to have a desperate need or want. That character has to want something very badly. Let's say, for example, the character's me, and I'm been invited to give a talk, and I have to speak to 70 people, and I don't have a microphone. I need a microphone. It's very hard to imagine a story because, well, I could actually get up and just speak louder. It's not a serious, desperate need. But a young woman is getting married, and she wants her father to be at her wedding. But he has been deported from the country she's living in. That's a serious, serious need. That's a serious want. You have to have a character who wants something very badly, number two. And number three, they cannot have the thing they want or the thing they need. Who? My character. What? The thing that character wants, and why can't they have it? That's it. That is the key. Kung Fu Panda, my brother in the audience, what does Kung Fu Panda want?
To save the world.
Okay, but how does he want? What does he want specifically?
Freedom.
Sorry?
Freedom.
Freedom. But he wants to be what?
A true like Kung Fu.
He wants to be a master Kung Fu warrior, right? In order to save the world. But why doesn't he just be that master Kung Fu warrior? What's his problem? He's completely lazy. He's overweight, and all he really wants to do is sleep, I think. Or what is he? He wants to eat and noodles. He eats his noodles.
And dumplings.
So look, you've got it's like a. What's funny is when my youngest daughter Maria was in, I think, like 3rd grade, I was invited to give a workshop to her class. And I didn't know about storytelling, and I was like more nervous than I was coming here today. And on the subway, it came to me like, I can talk about Kung Fu Panda. And now, mostly I talk about Kung Fu Panda. It's a perfect story. But you see, it's like a detonation. It's charged. When you have the 3 ingredients, you have something that's charged. It has a positive charge that, when brought together, has explosive possibility. So, a panda who,
Sorry. What are explosives are trauma inducing? Just say that.
Thank you. Thank you for telling me that. That's a liberating possibility.
I let love go, but now I'm explosive.
Thank you.
Tread carefully, please.
Yeah, thank you. So, the elements of a seed. If the elements are not there, like the little boy with the carrot, you can water them forever and they will not become a story if these elements are not present. You can write journalism, which is very important, filled with information, and you can make political arguments with a very strong message, but you will not tell a story. So here, you know what I do need is a sense of time, because I know that we started late,
Yeah.
but I don't know if that's being deducted from our total time.
It's not, no.
Or if there's someone accounting and, okay.
We'll track it.
Okay, well, I'd like to, that's okay, I'm talking too loud. I
No,
think.
you're not. The microphone's in there.
No,
It's
it's
a big
okay.
room, so.
Actually can't hear you.
She must be.
You were talking about 3 ingredients.
Yeah, thank you. But I wanted to say something else about my own difficult journey to get here, if I could, because I think it's relevant. Well, the short version of this story is that when I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker, it was not because I had seen Star Wars and wanted to be George Lucas, because I hadn't seen Star Wars. I wanted to be a filmmaker because as a teenager I felt lost and confused about the world I lived in. And I was very, very unhappy, and I was angry, and I acted out, and I ended up in a lot of trouble. And in different circumstances, I would have been in jail for a long time. My mother and father grounded me. Is that something we're familiar with? Ground? You know, like you can't leave home. And I asked for how long, because I had had friends who had been grounded for a week, or if you were really bad, for 2 weeks. And I was told I was grounded forever. And I was like 14 years old. There was no end date. I was grounded forever. And I was in London. I didn't say that. I grew up 5 years in the US. We moved to Belgium. I become like a Belgian boy. And then I feeling so happy to be a Belgian boy, we moved to London, and they put me in an American school. And now I'm like an American boy, but I don't know really what it means to be an American boy. And the English, because London is in England, the English didn't like the American boys, and they thought I was an easy target because I was a soft kind of boy, you know, I was not a toughie. So I would get beaten up. I was beaten up a lot. And they would always use the F word followed by American when they would beat me up. And so I have, from the time I was like 14, 15, I've had a bad attitude about this country. Like, what did this country do that would make people so angry that they would beat me up and throw bottles against the front door of the house? And, you know, I was grounded. There was no end to the grounding. I finally would ask my mother, more angry than ever, what am I supposed to do sitting at home all the time? And she said, I want you to think about why you're so angry. And that didn't help me at all. But in that period, someone gave me a camera. And I started to take pictures with the camera. And without realizing it, I'm 14 or 15 years old. Nobody had cameras. Nobody that we knew had cameras. It's not like today. But when I would bring the camera up to my eye, right, it would block out most everything else. As I was looking through it and framing things, something happened to me that I started to feel like maybe I can control the world I'm in. I didn't understand what was happening, but the camera began to allow me to be conscious of what I was looking at or what I was seeing. And I became a photographer, and the camera saved my life. And I was determined to be a still photographer, and I studied the work of social documentary photographers, and I decided I wanted to be a magnum photographer, photographing injustice. And I started to study that at university, and then I had an awakening, another awakening, when I put all of my work together for my graduate program at university. And I realized that the subject was the peace movement. At the time, the movement against nuclear war. And I had photographed peace activists in different places, in England and in this country. I went to Hiroshima and to Nagasaki to photograph survivors of the nuclear bombing. And I looked at the photographs in my final project, and I had this terrible realization that I didn't know any of the people in my photographs. The photographs were some of them were very strong. I have one still up on my wall, but I didn't know who the people were. And I thought, these are supposed to be like representations. These are supposed to speak about the truth. But how can I know the truth if I have no idea who these people are? I didn't know the names of most of them. At that time, my grandfather died. I was in England. My grandfather died here. I came back to be with my grandmother and to drive to Florida from Boston with her as a way of bonding. And we stayed with all of her old friends. And one couple told me a story that really changed my life. She was a Greek immigrant who lived in Lowell, Massachusetts, north of Boston. And as a child, she worked in the factory. Children were still working in the factories. And she told me that when she was little, they all lived on one side of the river in a town called Drake, and they all crossed the bridge by foot to work in the textile factory. And Massachusetts in the winter is freezing, more so then than now. And they would freeze on the way to the factory and then on the way home. She told me that her mother, when she was a little girl, her mother offered her at the end of the day a choice. That they could buy bread in the bakery that was right at the side of the factory and walk back home across the bridge, or they could take the bus and not buy bread. It was the daughter's choice. And she said she always chose to buy the bread. And it would be warm as they walked across the bridge. Now, I want to stand up for this, but I'll try and do it sitting down. As a photographer, right, who had been photographing the peace movement and was now having this question of what does it mean for me to be taking your picture if I don't know your story, if I don't know who you are? What does that mean? I start to picture this mother and daughter coming across the bridge, bundled in the cold, behind them the factory, ice on the ground. It's a very strong photograph, and I imagine leaning, getting down low to the ground, so they're small in the frame. Mother and daughter bracing against the cold. And in my photograph, it was an image of oppression. It was an image of suffering. It was an image of exploitation. And then Georgia, that's her name, said, David, she had a lovely musical voice. She said, David, those were the happiest moments of my life. Bringing the bread home. Why? Because when we came home with the bread, I was the hero of the whole family. So I realized my photograph was not enough. Do you know what I'm saying? The photograph would show one part of the reality, the objective part. But unless we could have that and have her then contradict our preconceptions and say, yes, it is tough, but I love my life, I love what I'm doing, I love my choice. That contradiction is where I wanted to be. So I stopped taking still photographs and I decided to make film. And I promised my wife I wouldn't talk about me today. So I failed with that. But I'm saying this because I put the camera down and I decided, okay, I need to have people speak. And I started to make documentary films. And I made 2 documentary films on my own, self-taught. One was about a strike in a small community in Maine where they made paper in a factory up in the woods. And another was in Roxbury, Massachusetts, with a group of African American women whose children had been taken from them because of drug addiction. And now they were clean and trying to get their children back. I made 2 films over the course of about 5 years. And I devoted myself to that work. I knew I wanted the films to give voice to these people, to their struggles. And I made the films, and the films screened at festivals, and I went to events with them. But the films did not work. Because the films were not about one person who wants one thing very badly and cannot have it. The films were about theme. The films were about the message. the films were about all workers. The films were about systemic racism generally. So now I'm 27 and I realize I need help. And I don't even know what the help is. And I decide to go to film school, quite old compared to most of the students. And that's when I spend 5 years learning to make fiction films at NYU. The best thing that came from it is Elizabeth, my wife, who was also in the class, and instead of listening to the lecture, I was looking at Elizabeth. All of this is to say, I'm not just saying one person with one problem and one obstacle because I read it in a book. I've spent my whole life trying to figure out these ingredients, and I think they can be applied to anything that we want to apply them to. But so far, are we okay with where we are?
Yes.
I really appreciate your attentive listening, and the other thing I do is I take all kinds of notes right before giving a talk, and then I never look at them, so I missed all the good bits.
Can I ask a question as we go along?
Yeah, please.
So with the third element, what if it's somebody that doesn't achieve, so when it comes to obstacle or doesn't achieve, you said like doesn't reach his goal?
Say that again, sorry.
For the third element, you said that they cannot reach their goal and they cannot achieve their...
No, I meant to say it has to be very, very difficult. Not that they can't achieve it, but that the thing that they want has to be extremely hard to get because of an obstacle or various obstacles. So, I'll give you an example. I mean, I'm going to talk about things that are non-political for a minute, just everyday life. Girl likes boy in school, has a crush on a boy. When she thinks, oh, I would love to be dating this boy. And the next day, at lunch break, the boy comes up to her and says, do you want to go on a date? There's no story. Same elements. Girl likes boy, would love to go on a date with him, but she stutters, she stammers, it's difficult for her to actually express what she's feeling. And when he comes up to her to say, do you want to go for a walk? As my mother did when she was young, she cannot say yes. Suddenly, the same elements, a character who wants a thing very badly has the possibility to become a story because the thing that she wants, she cannot easily have. She has to overcome something in order to get it. And why this is essential. The three elements is the who is the character, the what do they want, and the why can't they have it. But the story, Kung Fu Panda, will either result in one of three things. They get it, they change their mind, or they don't get it. In all three of those, it still is a story. They don't have to win. They don't have to get the thing that they want in order to have the story. In the case of the story of the young woman whose father was deported, she did not get her father at the wedding, right? But the elements of a story were still there. It's just that they were treated as plot yet, not yet made clear as a story. So, does that answer the question though? It's not vital that you succeed, it's vital that you try. And you have to be pushed hard. If the thing that you want is not that difficult to get, it will not really work as a story, and here's the reason why. What is the function of a story in our life? Why are stories so important? Why is it that we cannot actually live without them? It's because stories, and I'm saying things you all have heard and people have said much more eloquently. Stories give meaning to our lives. Stories are how we make sense of who we are, and where we're trying to go. And if it's not difficult to get the object of desire, nothing is revealed to us. The beautiful thing about a story is that our character, the panda, who desperately wants to save the world by becoming a brilliant kung fu master, he cannot be that brilliant kung fu master because he's lazy like most of us. So if he's going to try, he has to dig deep. He has to confront his own internal obstacles, laziness. He has to confront external obstacles, the world's perception of him. What kind of silly panda is going to be a hero? And when he confronts those obstacles, his true character starts to be revealed. The function of a story is to reveal the true character of the person whose story it is. The true character. What do I mean by that? And then are we almost at, okay. I live in New York City. I moved there for film school, and I've been there on and off since then, 25 years. When I was in film school, I would read the newspaper, the actual paper, and sometimes there were little small metro stories. And I read one about a man on the subway. And it was the story of a man who was going to work. He went down to the platform, waiting for his train. He had the newspaper. His train didn't come. And then he heard some voices echoing from down the platform. And he looked over and he saw that 3 young men had come into the platform and were harassing a homeless man or an unhoused man who was laid out on a bench on the platform. And it was winter, and the man had newspapers in his clothing to stay warm. These young men were making fun of this homeless man, and they were pushing him. And they pushed him, and he actually fell off the bench onto the platform. Everyone on the platform saw this happening, and what did they do? They leaned in to see if the train was coming, because they wanted that train to come so they could get in the train and not deal. This train didn't come. They're looking at their newspapers. Today they'd be looking at their phones. Something is happening on the platform. One of the boys takes out a box of matches and starts to try and light this homeless man on fire. And then our character suddenly, apparently without thinking, walked over and said, "Stop it. Why are you doing that? Stop it. You're hurting this man." And the moment he did that, the young men turned their energy to him, and they stabbed him, and they fled. The man, bleeding, is taken to a hospital. That is not a story. That is plot. What struck me in the newspaper is this. They interviewed his wife, and here's what she said. She said, "I know my husband, and he would never do that. He would never be the one to go and get involved in something like that. But he did." Do you see what I'm saying? And what that tells us as storytellers is we have to know our character better than they may even know themselves. When we're telling the story, we have to put ourselves in these situations where we can ask, what will our character do if this happens? The key is that the character reveals themselves. The character wants something, the thing they want is difficult. The obstacles are, some are internal, some are external. But in trying to get that thing that they want, they will reveal something about themselves. And when they do, we have a story. The king died and the queen died and a wedding happened and the father couldn't come and someone was shot and a baby got lost and a migrant ship went down, and it's all plot. It is meaningless. And then you say, well, let's make it bigger. 5 migrant ships went down. I've spent years on the US-Mexico border, on both sides, meeting with migrants, working with migrants, trying to help erase that border so that people can cross it freely. I have heard thousands of stories about the struggle to make it across that border. And I realize none of them resonate unless one of them does. You need one character, and that one character will tell you about the whole world of the pandas. The one story, but it has to be rooted. So the 3 things, they're easy to remember. And when you add them together, the who, the what, the why, you get something I call the premise. Every story has a premise. And what I'm hoping we can do is take a break. Maybe there'll be some questions, but we take it maybe, because it's a long session. Right? What would be an appropriate break? Like 10 or 15 minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. She's very exigente. 10 minutes. She's very 10-minute break.
Before we take that break, can I throw something into the pot?
Oh, please.
As food for thought?
Please, yeah.
If I understood one of the points that you made, it jives with one of the cases that has become, for me, the most prominent case on our ballot. And for a reason. Nico Pillay earlier referenced Palestine as being at the root of what has been happening, to Muslims and to others in the name of a war on terrorism for years. He said Palestine's at the root. Now, you said there should be, if I understood you correctly, one area of focus or primary focus, and there has been for me for a number of years. There's a political prisoner by the name of Afia Siddiqui. Former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, the late Ramsey Clark, when he joined us in Texas some years ago for a rally for Afia, and we had arranged for him to speak at one of the large centers in the DFW area, he said in the course of his speech that night, the case of Afia Siddiqui is the worst case of individual injustice I have ever witnessed. When he said that, it resonated with me because, I've been doing human rights work in America now for well over 30 years, almost 40. And this case there's no case that's been more weighty on me than this case of this woman, Afia Siddiqui. Now, going to what Clark said and going to what Nico Pillay said earlier, when Afia was a student in Boston, she was a student at MIT in Brandeis, she was very active, and she was targeted by the Zionists in Boston. She was targeted by them because she was so active. They wanted to make an example out of her, much the same way that Kyrie Irving is being made an example of right now. And there was a lot of malicious things written and said about this little sister, this little student, Afia Siddiqui, that I believe ultimately led to her coming up on the radar in the wake of 9/11, when anyone who was an active Muslim in America was being investigated. That's how she came up on the radar. The short of it is that ultimately it led to her, after she finished her schooling in the United States, 12 years, and went back home to Pakistan. She's not a Palestinian, she's a Pakistani. She went back home to Pakistan, and then she was targeted for rendition. And this has become for the late Ramsey Clark and for me. The worst of the worst of the worst, but symbolic of the many other cases. And one of the arguments that we have been making over the years is that if we can get Anthea free, if we can get her free by telling her story, it will have a ripple effect on many other cases who otherwise would not be able to see the light of day. So again, if I understand that point that you made about, there having to be one that you focus on and tell that story, and that story resonates. Well, for me, it is the story of Anthea Siddiqui. She'll be 20 years of wrongful imprisonment this coming March.
Thank you for telling me that, sharing that. What I was going to say maybe can tie directly into that, which is that if the goal was to tell Afi